Betrayal and violence were entirely routine for a man like Damian Gallion. The real shock didn't come from a rival cartel, but from Chloe, his quiet, heavy-set maid. When the brutal kingpin tracked her into the shadowy streets of South Boston, he uncovered a secret that would bring him straight to his knees. Damian Gallion didn't pay attention to the help. As the head of the most unforgiving syndicate in Massachusetts, his mind was occupied by shipping manifests at the port of Boston, corrupt city aldermen, and the ever-present threat of the rival factions in Charlestown. His world was sharp-tailored and soaked in violence. He lived in a sprawling fortified brownstone on Louisburg Square in Beacon Hill, a fortress disguised as a relic of old money. Inside this fortress, the staff functioned as ghosts. They were trained to see nothing, hear nothing, and above all, be nothing. Then there was Chloe. Chloe Jenkins was impossible to ignore, primarily because she did not fit the mold of the sleek, invisible staff Mrs. Higgins, the draconian housekeeper, usually hired. Chloe was fat. She possessed a soft, heavy, unapologetic fullness that stood in stark contrast to the hard, cold edges of Damian's world. Her pale blue uniform always seemed a fraction too tight across her broad shoulders and full hips, and the physical exertion of cleaning a 4-story mansion often left her flushed, a light sheen of sweat gathered at her temples. The other staff were cruel in the quiet, insidious way that unhappy people often are. Damian had caught fragments of their whispers from his second-floor study. They mocked her slow, deliberate gait on the grand mahogany staircase. They scoffed at the heavy, exhausted sighs she let out when she thought no one was listening. But Damian, a man whose survival depended entirely on his ability to read the unsaid, saw something else entirely. He saw her resilience. It started on a Tuesday in late October. The night before, a violent disagreement had taken place in Damian's basement office. A lieutenant from a rogue crew had tried to skim off the top of the union pension funds. The ensuing conversation had left the imported Persian rug ruined and the room smelling of copper and fear. When Damian came down at 6 a.m, expecting the usual frantic, terrified cleaning crew, he found only Chloe. She was on her heavy knees, her thick thighs pressed against the hardwood floor, scrubbing the dark, congealed blood from the baseboards with methodical precision. She didn't tremble. She didn't gag. Her plump hands, encased in yellow rubber gloves, moved with a rhythmic, almost surgical calm. When she looked up and saw the boss standing in the doorway, a man whose mere name made grown men flee the city, she simply wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, leaving a faint streak of suds on her forehead. "The rug is a total loss, Mr. Gallion," she had said, her voice surprisingly soft, a rich contralto, lacking any of the typical trembling deference. "But the floorboards will be fine once the bleach sets." Damian had stared at her, genuinely taken aback. "Does the blood not bother you, Chloe?" She paused, looking down at the red-stained sponge in her hand. A shadow crossed her round face, aging her soft features by a decade. "I've seen worse messes, sir. Blood washes out. It's the other things that don't." From that morning on, Damian became acutely aware of her. He began to watch her on the estate's closed-circuit security feeds. He noticed that despite her heavy frame and the visible toll the labor took on her joints, she worked twice as hard as the younger, thinner maids. But more concerning to a man plagued by paranoia, he began to notice her anomalies. Chloe was stealing. It wasn't silver or cash from the loose money clips left on the foyer tables. It was strange, specific items: a bottle of medical-grade antiseptic and heavy-duty gauze from the trauma kit in the garage, 3 high-calorie protein shakes from the walk-in pantry, a discarded, slightly torn wool blanket from the guest house. His underboss, a ruthless pragmatist named Leo Rossi, suggested she was pawning the supplies for drug money or selling them to a back-alley clinic. "Fire her boss," Leo had urged, pouring himself a bourbon in the study. "Or better yet, let me take her down to the harbour and find out who she's fencing our medical supplies to. If she's patching up guys from the O'Rourke crew, we have a massive security breach." Damien had stared out the rain-streaked window, watching the heavy grey clouds roll over the Charles River. He pictured Chloe's soft, tired face, the quiet dignity in her hazel eyes. "No," Damien murmured. "Leave her be. I want to know exactly what she's doing." The final straw came on a freezing Thursday evening. Damien was reviewing a ledger in the kitchen when Chloe clocked out. As she wrapped a thick, frayed grey scarf around her neck, she winced, shifting her weight heavily onto her right leg. Damien's sharp eyes caught a glimpse of her forearm as her coat sleeve rode up. A fresh, dark, purple bruise, the distinct shape of a handprint, marred her pale skin. Damien's blood went inexplicably cold. No one touched his people. Even the lowliest maid under his roof belonged to the Galleon Syndicate, and touching what belonged to Damien was a death sentence. As Chloe shuffled out the heavy oak back door into the biting Boston wind, Damien made a decision. He didn't call Leo. He didn't call his security detail. He grabbed the keys to his understated matte black Audi A8. He was going to find out exactly where his maid was going, who put that bruise on her arm, and why a woman who could calmly scrub brains out of a floorboard looked so utterly, completely terrified every night when she left his house. The Boston rain was relentless, an icy drizzle that slicked the cobblestones of Beacon Hill and turned the city lights into smeared streaks of neon. Damien kept the Audi 2 blocks behind Chloe as she made her way toward the Park Street T station. He watched her heavily bundled figure descend into the subway. Leaving his car in a reserved alleyway spot near the station, Damien pulled up the collar of his dark wool trench coat and followed her underground, keeping his distance in the evening commuter rush. Chloe boarded a Red Line train heading south. Damien slipped into the adjacent car, watching her through the glass connecting doors. She sat heavily on the plastic seat, her large canvas tote bag clutched tightly to her chest like a shield. She looked exhausted, her head leaning against the vibrating window, her eyes closed. Up close, without the estate's soft lighting, the deep purple bags under her eyes were prominent. This wasn't the face of a woman running a side hustle. It was the face of a woman running on fumes. They rode the train deep into Dorchester, far past the gentrified zones, entering a neighborhood where the streetlights were shattered and the storefronts were heavily barred. When Chloe finally stood up to exit at Fields Corner, she moved with a pronounced limp. Damien trailed her up to the street level. The wind here was harsh, blowing trash across the cracked pavement. This was O'Rourke territory, the territory of the Irish mob faction that had waged a bloody war against Damien's family for a decade. It was the same faction responsible for the car bomb 3 years ago that had assassinated Damien's older brother, Liam, and Liam's wife. Damien's hand instinctively drifted to the cold steel of the Sig Sauer, P226, holstered at his ribcage. Is she working for them? The thought tasted like ash in his mouth. If Chloe was an informant for the O'Rourkes, he would have to kill her tonight. There would be no trial, no hesitation. Just a bullet in the dark. He followed her down a narrow, unlit street named Tremont Alley, flanked by decaying triple-decker houses with peeling paint and rotting porches. Chloe stopped in front of the most dilapidated house on the block. The front steps were crumbling, and the windows on the upper floors were boarded up with decaying plywood. Instead of going to the front door, she squeezed her heavy frame through a narrow, overgrown pathway along the side of the house, heading toward the back. Damien waited a full 60 seconds, letting the shadows swallow her, before moving silently in pursuit. His leather-soled shoes made no sound on the wet concrete. He crept along the side of the house. As he rounded the rear corner, he expected to hear the rough voices of O'Rourke's thugs or the frantic rustling of a drug den. Instead, he heard the heavy metallic clank of a deadbolt sliding into place, followed by a soft, muffled sound coming from a basement window right near his boots. Damien crouched down. The basement window was thick with grime and streaked with dirt, but a sliver of warm yellow light bled through a crack in the makeshift curtains. He leaned in, holding his breath, and peered through the 1-inch gap. The basement was a stark contrast to the decaying exterior. It was small and cramped, the cinder-block walls painted a soft, cheerful yellow. A space heater glowed bright orange in the corner. Against one wall was a small, ancient refrigerator, and next to it, a table covered in the very medical supplies she had stolen from his garage. But it was the center of the room that made Damien's heart stop dead in his chest. Sitting on a worn, floral-patterned sofa was Chloe. She had taken off her wet coat, her broad shoulders slumped in absolute exhaustion. Kneeling in front of her was a man with a shaved head and a heavily tattooed neck carefully wrapping the thick gauze around Chloe's calf, which was marred by a deep, ugly laceration. Damien recognized the man instantly. It was Tommy "The Hook" Callahan, a notorious enforcer for the O'Rourke Syndicate. Damien drew his weapon, the safety clicking off under his thumb. The betrayal was absolute. She was housing a wounded enemy. Damien was about to kick in the flimsy basement door and end them both when a tiny, high-pitched voice echoed from the corner of the room, outside of Damien's immediate line of sight. "Auntie Chloe, did you bring the milk?" Chloe's exhausted face instantly transformed. The weariness melted away, replaced by a radiant, blinding love. She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out the protein shakes she had taken from Damien's pantry. "I got them, sweetheart. Just like I promised." A small figure stepped into Damien's field of vision. The gun in Damien's hand suddenly felt as heavy as an anvil. His breath hitched, trapped in his throat. The world around him, the rain, the cold, the gang war, evaporated into a roaring silence. It was a little girl no older than 4. She had a mop of chaotic dark curls and startlingly bright emerald green eyes. She was wearing the oversized torn wool blanket from Damien's guest house like a makeshift cape. Damien didn't just recognize those green eyes. He saw them every time he looked in the mirror. He saw them in every portrait of his murdered brother, hanging in the Beacon Hill mansion. It was Lily, Liam's daughter. The niece Damien had been told was incinerated in the explosion 3 years ago. The little girl the police had declared dead, leaving Damien with nothing but a closed casket, filled with ash, and a heart consumed by vengeance. Lily was alive. Damien stood frozen in the rain, the water dripping down his face, like cold tears. He watched through the grimy glass as Tommy Callahan, the ruthless O'Rourke enforcer, gently lifted the little girl and placed her safely on Chloe's lap. "She had a fever today, Chloe," Tommy said, his gravelly voice surprisingly gentle. "I couldn't go to the pharmacy. O'Rourke's guys are sweeping the neighborhood. They know someone is hiding down here. That's how you got Maid on your way home yesterday. You can't keep taking hits to protect us." Chloe pulled the little girl tightly against her soft, heavy chest, wrapping her arms around the child like a human shield. "I don't care about the bruises, Tommy," she whispered fiercely. "They won't find her. I promised her mother before she died. I will protect this child with my life." Damien stepped back from the window, his mind fracturing. His quiet, overweight maid wasn't a thief. She wasn't an addict. She was a ghost from a war he thought he had lost, standing between an innocent child and an army of killers. And now Damien Gallion was going to burn the city to the ground to protect them both. The freezing rain battered the crumbling exterior of the Dorchester house, but inside Damien Gallion's chest a different kind of storm raged. He stared through the grimy basement window at the impossible sight before him. Lily, the niece he had mourned, the bloodline he thought severed, was sitting in a subterranean hovel, clutching a stolen protein shake as if it were a chalice of gold. He didn't kick the door in. Violence was the only language Damien knew fluently, but right now it was the wrong dialect. He needed to enter that room without triggering Tommy Callahan's trigger finger or terrifying the child. Damien stepped away from the window, walked to the heavy, reinforced basement door, and knocked. Not the frantic pound of a police raid, but 3 slow, deliberate thuds, the sound of inevitability. Inside, the muffled voices instantly died. The scrape of a chair echoed, followed by the terrifyingly distinct clack-clack of a pump action, shotgun being racked. "Who is it?" Tommy's voice was a ragged whisper through the damp wood. "It's Damien Gallion," he replied, his voice calm, carrying effortlessly over the wind. "I am unarmed, Callahan, but if you don't open this door in 5 seconds, I will buy this entire block and raze it to the ground with you inside." The silence that followed was agonizing. Then the deadbolt slid back with a heavy groan. The door creaked open an inch, revealing the cold steel barrel of Tommy's Mossberg 500, aimed directly at Damien's chest. Damien didn't flinch. He slowly raised his hands, pushing his heavy wool trench coat back, to show he wasn't reaching for his Sig Sauer. He pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped into the suffocating warmth of the basement. Chloe was backed into the far corner, her body completely enveloping the little girl. Her eyes, usually so calm and subservient when sweeping his mahogany floors, were wide with feral, unadulterated terror. She looked like a cornered lioness. "Mr. Gallion." Chloe breathed out her voice, trembling for the first time since he had known her. "Please. She doesn't know anything. It's just me." Damien ignored the shotgun leveled at his ribs. He slowly sank to his knees on the cold concrete floor, uncaring as the dampness seeped through his bespoke suit. He lowered his head until he was at eye level with the little girl peering out from behind Chloe's heavy arm. "Hello, Lily," Damien whispered, his voice cracking. The ruthless kingpin, the man who had ordered the execution of half the dock workers in Southie, was crying. Lily blinked her emerald eyes. "Are you one of the bad men?" "Noah Storr," Damien replied softly, using the Irish term of endearment his brother used to say. "I'm your Uncle Dami." Tommy slowly lowered the shotgun, his tattooed face etched with profound exhaustion. "I knew you'd find her eventually, Gallion. I just didn't think it would be your maid that led you here." Damien stood up slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. The emotional shockwave was passing, leaving behind a cold, terrifying clarity. He looked at Chloe, taking in her bruised arm, her torn clothes, and the fierce protective set of her jaw. "Explain!" Damien commanded, his voice dropping back into the glacial tone of a cartel boss. "My brother's car was rigged with C4. The coroner gave me a box of ashes." "How is she breathing?" Chloe swallowed hard, keeping one hand firmly on Lily's curls. "I used to be a pediatric trauma nurse at Mass General, Mr. Gallion. 3 years ago, they brought your sister-in-law, Nora, into my ward. She was DOA. But Tommy was the one who pulled Lily from the wreckage before the secondary explosion." Damien turned his lethal gaze to Tommy. "You were O'Rourke's trigger man. You planted the bomb." "I planted the bomb," Tommy admitted, not breaking eye contact, though his hands gripped the shotgun white-knuckled. "But O'Rourke told me Liam was riding solo. When I saw the baby seat in the back, I couldn't do it, Gallion. I'm a killer, not a monster. I pulled her out and ran. I couldn't take her to a hospital. O'Rourke had cops on the payroll looking for survivors. So I took her to the only nurse I knew who wouldn't ask questions. He brought her to my apartment. Chloe continued, her voice gaining strength. She was burned, terrified. I patched her up. But O'Rourke's men found out Tommy didn't finish the job. They burned down my apartment complex. They got my nursing license revoked through their connections at the state board. They made me a ghost. Damien stared at the heavy, exhausted woman before him. The pieces slammed into place. You took the job at my house. Why? To watch you, Chloe said fiercely, her chin tilting up. I had to know if you were the one who ordered the hit on your own brother to seize power, or if it was O'Rourke. If you were safe, I was going to bring her to you, but until I knew for sure, I used my access to your estate to steal the medical supplies and food we needed to survive. We've been moving from basement to basement for 3 years. Damien looked at Chloe. He looked at her soft, heavy frame, the exhaustion in her posture, and the raw, unyielding courage radiating from her soul. The women in Damien's world were ornamental, sleek, thin, dangerous, and entirely self-serving. But Chloe was a fortress. Her body, which his cruel staff mocked, was the shield that had kept his bloodline alive. And the bruise on your arm? Damien asked, his voice dangerously soft. O'Rourke's sweepers, Tommy answered. They bumped into her on the street yesterday. They recognized her from the hospital 3 years ago. They roughhoused her, tried to follow her. That's why I had to move them here tonight. O'Rourke knows she's in Dorchester. It's only a matter of time before Tommy could finish his sentence, the single yellow light bulb overhead exploded into glass dust. A deafening crack echoed through the basement as a high-caliber bullet tore through the boarded-up window above, burying itself into the drywall inches from Tommy's head. They had been found. "Get down!" Damien roared, plunging the room into absolute darkness. He drew his Sig Sauer in a blindingly fast motion, throwing himself against the cinder-block wall near the shattered window. Outside, the heavy boots of O'Rourke's hit squad hit the wet pavement. "Sweep the basement, burn them out!" A harsh Boston accent barked through the pouring rain. "Tommy, the tunnel!" Chloe yelled over the sound of shattering glass. She didn't freeze. She didn't scream. With terrifying efficiency, she scooped the 4-year-old girl into her heavy arms, pressing Lily's face into her soft neck to muffle the child's sudden shrieks. "There's an old coal chute in the back corner," Tommy shouted to Damien, pumping his shotgun. "It leads out to the storm drains under Tremont Alley. We can get to the tracks." "Go," Damien ordered, firing 3 rapid shots through the window gap, rewarded by a sharp cry of pain from the alleyway. "Take my niece and go. I'll hold the choke point." "We're not leaving you, Mr. Gallion," Chloe yelled back. In the dim light filtering from the street lamps outside, Damien saw her refuse to move toward the chute. "I am the boss of the Gallion Syndicate. Chloe, you will obey me," Damien barked, ejecting his spent magazine and slapping a fresh one in with a metallic click. "I don't work for you anymore, Damien." She snapped back her eyes, blazing with an intensity that momentarily robbed him of his breath. "I protect the child, and she needs her uncle alive. Now move." A heavy wooden battering ram slammed into the reinforced basement door. The hinges groaned, splintering the frame. Damien realized arguing with this woman was a lost cause. "Tommy, blow the door the second it breaches. Chloe, get in the chute." Chloe hurried to the back corner, her large frame easily kicking aside a heavy rusted grate that would have taken a normal man 5 minutes to pry loose. She slid into the dark, damp brick tunnel, pulling Lily safely down with her. The basement door gave way with a catastrophic splintering of wood. 3 armed men rushed in. Tommy fired the Mossberg. The booming roar of the shotgun in the enclosed space was deafening, catching the first two men in the chest and throwing them backward into the rain. Damien took out the third with a clean shot to the temple. In the shoot now, Damien grabbed Tommy by his tactical vest and shoved him toward the escape route. As Tommy slid down, Damien pulled a small, heavy object from his coat pocket, a fragmentation grenade he always carried for absolute emergencies. A second later, the basement above them erupted in a concussive blast of fire, and concrete collapsing the floor and sealing the tunnel behind them in a wall of rubble. The trio, plus the trembling child, scrambled through the freezing, ankle-deep water of the Dorchester storm drains. Damien took the lead, using the tactical flashlight on his pistol to guide them. Behind him, he heard Chloe panting heavily. The physical exertion was brutal on her, but she never slowed down, never asked to stop. She held Lily with a grip made of iron and love. When they finally emerged from a grate near the Red Line train yards, Leo Rossi and 3 matte black SUVs were already waiting, idling in the shadows. Damien had triggered the emergency GPS beacon on his watch the moment the shooting started. Leo, holding an automatic rifle, rushed forward, his eyes widening as he saw his boss emerge from the sewer with the presumed dead O'Rourke enforcer, the overweight Maid, and a child who looked exactly like Liam Gallion. "Boss," Leo stammered. Not a word Leo Damien commanded, his voice echoing in the rain-slicked yard. "Get them in the armored car. Call the cleaners. I want every O'Rourke safe house in the city leveled by sunrise. Tonight, the Irish War ends." 48 hours later, the Gallion estate on Beacon Hill was quiet, but it was no longer a cold, empty fortress. It felt entirely different. The O'Rourke syndicate was ashes. Damien had unleashed a coordinated strike that dismantled his rivals permanently, but the blood on the streets felt distant to him now. His world had narrowed to the second-floor guest wing. Damien stood in the doorway of the grand bedroom. The fire was crackling in the hearth. Lily was fast asleep in the center of the massive 4-poster bed, clutching a brand-new stuffed bear. Sitting in a heavy leather armchair by the fire was Chloe. She was out of the blue maid's uniform, wearing a soft, luxurious cashmere sweater and dark slacks Damien had ordered the staff to buy for her. Her bruised arm was professionally bandaged. The deep exhaustion in her face was fading, replaced by a cautious, quiet peace. Damien walked into the room holding 2 cups of steaming tea. He handed one to her. "Thank you, Mr. Gallion," she murmured, taking the porcelain cup. "Damien," he corrected softly, pulling up a chair opposite hers. "I think we're well past titles, Chloe." She managed a small, tired smile. "Force of habit. I should probably start packing my things. Now that Lily is safe and Tommy is relocated, You aren't going anywhere," Damien interrupted, his voice firm yet layered with a warmth he hadn't used in years. Chloe looked down at her hands. "Damien, I'm a disgraced nurse who spent the last 3 years living in cellars. I don't fit in a world like this. Look at me. I don't belong in a Beacon Hill mansion." Damien leaned forward. He reached out his scarred, calloused hand, gently covering hers. She gasped softly at the contact, her eyes flying up to meet his. "For 3 years," Damien said, his voice a low, rough rumble, "I have lived in a house full of empty, beautiful, useless things. I was surrounded by people who would sell my soul for $1. And right under my roof, the bravest, strongest woman I have ever met was scrubbing my floors on her hands and knees." He brushed his thumb over her knuckles. "You think your size, your scars make you unworthy of this place. Chloe, your heart is the only real thing in this entire city. You carried my family's future on your back when the rest of the world turned away." A single tear slipped down Chloe's cheek. For the first time in her life, A man wasn't looking at her with pity, disgust, or indifference. Damien was looking at her with absolute, unwavering reverence. "You aren't my maid, Chloe," Damien whispered, his gaze dropping to her soft, trembling lips before meeting her hazel eyes again. "You are the queen of this house. And if you'll let me, I intend to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you never have to be invisible or afraid ever again." Chloe looked at the sleeping child, then back at the ruthless Mafia king who was kneeling before her, offering her a kingdom. She turned her hand over, intertwining her fingers with his. "Okay," she whispered into the quiet room. "Okay, Damien." Outside, the Boston rain finally stopped giving way to the first quiet dawn the city had seen in years. The ghosts of the past were finally laid to rest, and inside the fortress, the king had finally found his equal. If this gritty, heart-pounding story of hidden courage and mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Right now, don't forget to share this story with your friends who love an underdog heroine, and subscribe to the channel for more intense, dramatic stories with twists you'll never see coming. Drop a comment below. Would you have risked it all like Chloe did? See you in the next video.